Well, for the first time since 2021, Formula One returns to the Lusail International Circuit, home of the Qatar Grand Prix, for what could be one for the history books, but not in the way that you might think. The championship could be decided not on Sunday's Grand Prix, but during the sprint race on a Saturday. And I think that may spark some debates. I'm Martyn Lee from the Autosport podcast. Joining me today are Matt Q and Alex Kalinauckas. Now, gentlemen, welcome. Let's talk about that big talking point. Max Verstappen needs 3 points from the sprint to be a three-time world champion. Do you think the FIA were anticipating this could ever happen when they came up with the sprint format? Alex, we'll come to you first. Is it good or bad for F1 if Max wins the championship on a Saturday?
I mean, I think the big thing to take away here is rather depressing, in that the big talking point we're talking about here is whether the title can be decided in a sprint race and not on the last lap of the world championship between two different teams or two different drivers. Like, Redbull absolutely smashed this out of the park. And yeah, I'm sure it was thought of as a consequence. If you're going to award points for something, there's always the possibility that something will be sealed in a scenario that you perhaps wouldn't want, ideally, as we've said. But yeah, it's hard to know if it is sort of really good or really bad. I think from F1's point of view, they've been pushing hard for these sprint races. I think they'd like more of them. They know they can generate more cash out of certain circuits wanting them, and then balance that with, circuits that provide more action, more overtaking. So therefore, you sort of double your money with the racing action that you get on those weekends. So from their point of view, promoting a sprint race, Max Verstappen seals the world title in Qatar sprint race. Pretty good for F1, but sort of everybody else, it's just a bit sort of, okay, right, well, there we go. It's very modern F1, isn't it? It's one of these tracks that's, paying to have the circuit, paying huge sums. And it's a sprint race, and it's not something that the traditional fans are certainly very keen on. Max Verstappen himself, it'll be a great irony. He hates the sprint races. But yeah, I mean, personally, I've always been against the sprint races. And what I've been against actually is awarding points for them, because they're not at every round. There are only a select round, and I don't like the sort of sporting rules format being tweaked based on sort of minority events. I think it sort of taints the other ones. If you're going to do it, I'm not against changing the format or at least trying to adjust the format, because that's how evolution happens in every walk of life. I just don't think, unless it's going to be the same for every round, points shouldn't be awarded. I thought it was quite good when it set the grid. That was a sort of sporting reward in itself. But yeah, I don't really like points, and this is ultimately what it's led to.
Matt, this comes off the back of a string of stories that we've had over recent weeks and months. Social media impressions are going sort of through the floor, really, particularly with the North American viewers that came with the Netflix effect. And of course, that amazing battle in 21. We've seen the viewing figures dropping off in the US as well. It's not a disaster, but there's definitely been perhaps just an equalization or a rebalancing of people who were tuning in thinking Formula One's always like this. And again, not to sort of favour those that have liked Formula One for a long time. Everyone's welcome to watch the sport, but if you have watched for a little bit longer than recent years, then you will know the Formula One goes through sometimes these periods of dominance, and perhaps those viewers that came in are thinking, well, maybe it's not for me, and and that's okay. Everyone's welcome to watch or not. But Matt, does it somewhat damage Grand Prix racing if the championship's wrapped up by the time that most people turn on their TV and sit down on a Sunday afternoon and hang on, it's all wrapped up?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that obviously we had a similar situation last year where Verstappen wrapped it up in Japan eventually when they worked out how many laps had been and what points should be awarded. But it was decided early. But absolutely, it's I know comparisons between football and Formula One aren't always seamless, but the best days are when it goes down to that final game of the season, aren't there? And even then, you have something up for grabs lower down the table. It might be a place in Europe, whereas Formula One, the Constructors' Championship is already decided, and bar what it means to team principals when they have a few extra tens of millions to show to their sort of the board members above them, that who comes sixth or seventh doesn't ultimately make that much of a difference. And we've had that with races each weekend where Verstappen's disappeared into lead by 15 to 20 seconds. The stakes then are lower for the fight between third or fourth, as spectacular as that may be. It's when there's less riding on it, it's ultimately less exciting. Now you're extrapolated that over 23 races by the end of the year. But we knew we would be in a situation. I remember when the point for fastest lap was first muted, and people were thinking, oh God, what if that's how a championship's decided? That ultimately devalues the sanctity of a Grand Prix. Well, yeah, but at least then you might have Verstappen pitting, a couple of laps from the end, abandoning the race, just to put on some, fresh slicks and then smearing it into a wall, something like that. You don't necessarily have that this way around. We've had it, with Formula 3 earlier this year, where it's decided by qualifying. It ultimately devalues it. But if I could look for some sort of silver lining, it would be that sprint races generally set up the stage quite nicely. You think back to Silverstone, the first lap drama, the battle between Verstappen and Hamilton that ultimately led to the crash everyone talks about. Other examples, Brazil, you're sort of seeing what Mercedes could do with Russell, the tyre wear situation in both Imola and Austria last year, and how they set up Ferrari losses and Ferrari victories. It usually feeds into a good weekend-long narrative. So that's what you're sort of looking into. But yeah, if Verstappen wins everything, you don't have Vettel retiring and Alonso going to Alpine. You don't have Red Bull breaking a cost cap. You are deprived of headlines, and numbers will tail off in line with that. So, yeah, what do you expect, really?
Okay, Alex, let's talk about a Grand Prix preview of this weekend. I went back and watched the 21 race just to refresh the memory in our week off of Formula One. And I just reminded myself of how good that W12 looked in certain corners, and not to rub any salt in the wounds of Mercedes engineers, but man, that was good. And a great championship battle it was at the tail end of the 21 season as well. Let's talk about, as the cars head back to that track for the first time in a while, what can we expect? A few more front wings ripped off by curbs, and how are these new cars, which are totally different from the last time they raced there? Alex, what are you expecting to see at Qatar?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? If you think back to that weekend in late 2021, it was all about, the yellow flag controversy and what was Max Verstappen doing, keeping his footing in qualifying and things like that. We're not going to get the sort of political elements of it, the sort of interesting off-track sort of backstabbing things you love about Formula One. That's not going to happen this time around. But you described how mighty Mercedes was in Qatar in 2021. It's changed around wholesale now. This is going to be very similar to Japan. There are just simply no real low-speed corners. I think turn 1, there's a hairpin at turn 6. That's the only sort of slower speed stuff, but it's not like Monaco levels of slow. And that actually, I think, boosts McLaren, because we know those are the only corners where that car still really has trouble. And the fact that there aren't any, I think, is very significant. So essentially what my prediction would be is, and I know this is going to be very boring, but very similar to Japan. I don't see any reason why Red Bull don't run away with this out front. I don't see any reason why the McLarens don't qualify ahead of Sergio Perez, and that's what we're talking about. The latest Perez recovery. Can he do it without crashing into anything? But also I think that adds intrigue in terms of the fight between the McLaren drivers, because we saw Oscar Piastri was excellent at Lando Norris's level ahead of him in qualifying. And then things were very, very different in the race. Things are going to look slightly different. They've spent a lot of effort improving sort of access to the circuit, making the paddock basically sort of F1 spec. It was obviously, this is mainly famous, this track, for hosting MotoGP, and it's just a little bit smaller when you consider the motorbike racing and all the stuff they need to do that. So when we were there in 2021, it was really, it was sort of small scale. It was quite nice in a way. And actually, I think I got a bit of bad news for Matt. I promised him that this was a pretty good venue to go trackside and watch the cars, because there's no massive debris fencing. You can get close to them, even while they're going very, very fast, because that's what it was like in 2021. It was basically just bike track with big F1 cars going around it. Unfortunately, that's all changed now. They've put up debris fencing right the way around it, as you'd expect from a full sort of homologated safety track, from the FIA's point of view and everything. So, yeah, we won't be able to have quite the same experiences in 2021, but the cars are still going to be pretty mighty.
Yeah, and Adrian Newey did a big interview on the Formula One podcast, actually, and he was talking about how his 12 Constructors' Championships and his 12 Drivers' Championships, if that makes sense, if he can have a Drivers' Championship. He puts it's all down to Red Bull consistency, but as always, he just said it was the team. The team are amazing. They don't make any mistakes. It's so consistent. The human performance, the machine performance, going motor racing every weekend, it's just absolutely consistent. And I recommend checking that out. And he was giving huge praise to the amazing team effort this year. He said it's the most consistent motor racing car he's ever been around, which is amazing for him to say that. Let's look a little further down the grid, actually, Alex. Logan Sargeant is fighting for his Formula One career. He was backed by James Vowles on social media after a series of crashes since the Dutch GP. And perhaps that was making up for a little bit, actually. James doing some interviews before then to just point out, well, he's using some really old bits on the car because we haven't got unlimited money and he keeps crashing. And he was quite harsh. And so maybe he was just making up for that. I don't know. I don't think he cares too much about drivers' feelings. But what do you think about going into 2024, what that team needs to do to carry on improving?
Yeah, I think on the Sargeant front, it was a very public backing, wasn't it? That video that Williams released with James Vowles saying all of that, and it is interesting. He's a very canny operator. Like, he was essentially Toto Wolff's right hand man at Mercedes. He was being sort of groomed for command in that position, and you sort of sense that actually by releasing that video, it ticks quite a lot of boxes for Williams. Not only does it boosts Logan Sargeant, it actually adds pressure to him because they're saying, well, hang on, we're giving you as much support as we can, and if you're still making errors, we're not going to look like the bad guys at the end of the year if we decide we have to move on elsewhere. Equally, if it boosts Sargeant to cut out those errors and take him to his best form, so it's a win-win position, I would say, from James Vowles. But yeah, I mean, in terms of Logan Sargeant, I mean, it's unfortunate. He has had high points this year. It's just coincided in races where there hasn't been that, couple of elite cars being knocked out of the lead fight, and he's not got the points that come from those cars being absent and the smaller teams being able to move up. But equally, some of these accidents have been really poor. Like Singapore was pretty shocking. Japan seemed to get frightened by as Valtteri Bottas came around on the outside. They were really sloppy errors, and you'd say almost maybe he's not cut out at this level. And at the same time, he's had no preparation. Like James Vowles mentioned that he's 1.5 days in Bahrain. He's had no other running. Lots of well-funded rookies come in now, having done enormously long programs, or so maybe not as long, because obviously the famous one is Lewis Hamilton way back in 2006 doing thousands of testing kilometers. It's not that level, but they still get plentiful runs in the cars that are 2 years older. So yeah, it's hard for Sargeant. He's certainly lacked the usual preparation or the best preparation, but equally he's not quite grabbed it. So you can see it from both sides, and I think Williams, if they really want to kick on, they have to have a balanced driver lineup, because things are going okay with the car. I think they're improving it from what was thought to be, we're not even going to try in 2023. It's all about 2024. Well, they've done magnificently, all things considered. They've got a great driver in Alex Albon, and now it's again we see this across the grid. The teams that have the balanced driver lineups are succeeding, and that's where that's where Williams ultimately being let down, because they're quite a long way ahead in the battle at the Constructors' Championship in terms of Haas and AlphaTauri. But as I think we're going to come on to talk to you later on, one big result in like a crazy race, say Las Vegas, there's only 4 cars finish, and the 4th car is an AlphaTauri or a Haas, suddenly Williams' points lead is wiped out. So that's what they need to do when it comes to kicking on to the next level.
Let's get on to it now. I'm glad you mentioned Alex Albon. He mentioned AlphaTauri's recent form. It's a worry. Is he overhyping that car? Because AlphaTauri's been pretty slow at times this year, and Williams have executed a season very well. Matt, what was he doing there praising AlphaTauri? Do you think they genuinely have found some performance? And how are you reading that battle for places lower down?
I think AlphaTauri have found some performance, but sort of politely, I question anyone who's surprised by that. Williams have stated from very early on that they're not bothering to develop this car. It's a placeholder season until next year when they can bring new parts and have more of a technical structure in place. By contrast, AlphaTauri they've parted company with one of their chief aerodynamicists earlier in the season. They've been trying to recover, and this is sort of a tilt at understanding this package before they have much bigger or greater integration with the Red Bull main team and sharing parts. So with those two trajectories, one pushing to develop the car until the end of the season, the other team not, there shouldn't really be a surprise that there's convergence, especially when you think Williams, as impressive as they were in Zandvoort, that pace was entirely contingent on it being a headwind rather than a tailwind. Sort of, it was so circumstantial. So I'm not surprised that Alex Albon is, worried about their sort of the closing performance gap. But I'm also not surprised that the gap in performance is closing either. I suppose if you're Williams, you're looking to placate him because he has talked about, I want podiums and I want race wins and Albon is aware that his stock is as high as at any point than probably when he was, on the cusp of his first Red Bull move. So in terms of showing that the team can be competitive, alongside AlphaTauri, that's probably, so keeping him on board. But he is so integrated, such a part of that team. If anyone knows about, sitting back for a few races to reap a long-term reward and plan resources into next year, it will be him. So yeah, a bit of an interesting dynamic. If I could just add on the Logan Sargeant situation, I think Vowles is an incredibly, good operator, as Alex says, but I do wonder if it's just a bit more simple than that. And that is, Williams is owned by an investment company, Doralton. They want some return on investment, and they have ploughed funds into Sargeant's junior career. They want to see something in return for that. The rest of the driver market, the available options with Lawson staying on for Red Bull, it's not that inspiring. So, whether they do think it's just worth basically a placeholder season, and also Williams is keen to impress it. It's investing lower down the ladder as well. So whether it wants some sort of poster child in Sargeant to stay on, I think that might be an incentive to keep him. But I would caveat that and say, have we seen enough that someone who's been out of F1 could come back in? Let's say a Mick Schumacher. Is he any more expensive? In terms of crashes, probably not, because Sargeant's hit rate, and I mean that in a negative sense as opposed to the positive sense, has got more. He's crashing more as the season has worn on, and Schumacher is arguably a little bit quicker. And I was watching late night on Sunday in Singapore, Sargeant leave the paddock. He looks shattered of confidence. It's him and his personal trainer. That's it. He's not, being meted and greeted by or met and gret by anyone. He looks sort of down and out a little bit. So I do sort of, you do wonder where his head is at and what good it does to sort of stay on, if that's being a bit harsh. But even if like, so Lawson or the De Vries example, I think they're in different categories, but Lawson has acquitted himself superbly well. Is he a F1 world champion? Possibly not. Is he a multiple Grand Prix winner? It remains to be seen. But he's been active in Super Formula, which is great. He's race ready, like Sargeant was in F2. It shows you don't need to have the Piastri style thousands of kilometers in an old test car to be race ready, even though with sprint races, cost cap, everything is against a rookie. It shows that so long you can jump straight in and do a better job than what Sargeant is doing. So I know I've gone back to the previous question. It's just whether that's a calculated gamble, or is this just downward pressure from Doralton and Vowles is having his hands tied ever so slightly, and that's his decision.
Well, we look forward to seeing as they turn up this weekend and unpack the cars and build them, and who's going to go quick. Let's ask both of you your ones to watch. I don't mean that in terms of who do you think is going to win. I think it's pretty clear that Red Bull and Max Verstappen are so strong this weekend, but who you might be looking at. I think I'll keep an eye on the McLarens, because that driver battle's really interesting. No doubt Piastri is very quick, but still a lot to learn in terms of managing a Grand Prix race and tyre deg and things like that and putting it all together. He himself was pretty unhappy with his recent performance, saying, well, it's great on the podium, but wasn't the best I've ever done. So that just shows how driven he is. Alex, I'll come to you first. Who's your ones to watch this weekend?
Yeah, it's interesting, as I mentioned the Piastri and Norris thing earlier, and actually it ties into what Matt was saying about the preparation of these young drivers coming through. I think drivers like Piastri, Norris, Russell, Leclerc, I think they've actually redefined what a junior driver needs to do, because Théo Pourchaire is the favourite to win the F2 title, right? Couple of years, his performance, his reputation in the paddock is pretty tanked. Like, he's not got that upward trajectory. And it's the same with Felipe Drugovich. Going back, the drivers that take many years to win these junior categories just don't get the chances, because you need to have that. It's the cliche, the wrong thing, the meteoric rise. Totally incorrect saying, but anyway, that stunning momentum through the categories. That's what you need, and that's what's lacking. So yeah, maybe it would make sense for Williams to keep Sargeant on and see what comes through after that, and see what shakes up in what should be a more exciting 25 driver lineup. But if I had to pick a driver or drivers to watch this weekend from one team, I'm really interested in Ferrari. I think since the summer break, Carlos Sainz has been absolutely magnificent. then you get to a track like Suzuka, which is a real driver's test, whether it's speed over one lap or keeping the tyres alive through the course of a race stint on a high energy, high demanding track. Charles Leclerc was brilliant. So that's something I want to see this weekend. Can he keep his momentum from Suzuka? Will Sainz stay at the very, very high level he's been at since the summer break? So yeah, Ferrari's the area to keep an eye on for me this weekend.
Matt,
I'll go slightly lower down. Go AlphaTauri. I think from when Ricciardo broke his wrist, you saw that Singapore Japan double header, and you thought that's a tough ask for him to come back in time for those. So it was always looking at Qatar. He's not going to make that. Lawson will be in the car. So every race from now on is a bonus, with the sort of subtext now that he is not getting a race drive next year. So does his audition change because of that? And equally, Yuki Tsunoda, who's I think a big show of faith in the team to stick at with him for another year. And how does he compare alongside Lawson? Now he's got that safety net. Is there any sort of drop off? Is it because he's got that safety net? He'll, not his fault, reliability crashes, but will he make it more than a couple of corners after, a torrid run up until Suzuka, just to see sort of where those drivers are, where their heads are at? I think that'll be an interesting sort of subplot for the next few races.
Well, now I'd love to hear from you. Let us know in the comments below who your ones to watch this weekend are. Who will you keep an eye on? Who do you want to see going quick this weekend and getting their head down as they head towards the tail end of the season? What do you think of the sprint race weekend format and the idea that the Formula One World Champion could be crowned on a Saturday when there's no doubt fewer people are tuning in for that? What do you think of all the things we've talked about today? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you're not subscribed already, make sure you hit subscribe and give us a thumbs up so we know you like the video. And we'll catch you on the next one.